The next technique that we're going to practice is drawing with simple shapes. And then we're going to talk a little bit about sighting as well, which is basically double checking your measurements. So to draw with simple shapes, figure 2 has these binoculars broken up for you into the simple squares and circles that we're going to be filling in to your drawing underneath. So this main reference picture is here to refer back to as we're bringing in details and starting to double check our measurements. But for now, I'm just gonna look at figure 2 because it's simplified. It has all of the simple shapes already laid out for you. So I'm gonna get started with the left side here of the binocular. And there is the circle or oval on the top that I'm gonna start with. Move down to the smaller rectangle underneath. And then there's another shape here, larger rectangle that gets a little bit bigger towards the bottom. And then I'll end that. There's a small oval down here at the bottom as well. And then moving up to this part, right underneath where this square or rectangle is, there's another oval that hangs just a little bit outside or past that first rectangle that I drew. And then underneath that, there's a box coming down, and then a smaller box coming off of it here that will connect with the other side of the binoculars. And then I'm going to start with this next oval, which is the eyepiece for the right side of the binoculars. And that one looks just a little bit larger than the one that I already drew. So I'm going to go ahead and draw that. And then there is a square or rectangle coming off of that as well. And then that larger rectangle that pretty much lines up with the base of this one on the left. So I'm going to make sure that this lines up towards the bottom. And then there's this extra rectangle on the bottom of this piece that I'm going to draw. And this smaller square off to the side. So now I have all of my shapes outlined and drawn in. The next step is just double checking all of my proportions. If you double check your proportions before you go in and draw detail, it will save you a lot of time. So what I'm going to do first is find a piece of my reference picture to use as a measurement. So you always want to look at your reference picture and find a small area that you can compare the size of that to your drawing. So this is already outlined for you. So this second smaller rectangle here is what we're going to use as a measurement. But again, it really could be anything or any piece that's in your reference picture. Figure 3 here has this outlined, and then you can see it replicated multiple times down the side of the binoculars. This is basically showing you how many times this smaller shape fits in the height of the binocular here. So it fits 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times on this one, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times on this side. So when you have your reference picture, in order to do something like this, where you're measuring how many times it fits in the height of the binoculars, you're going to use your pencil as a unit of measure. But I'm going to measure the height of this outlined rectangle using my pencil. And then at this point, I can count how many times this fits inside of the left half of the binoculars. So I'm going to use my thumb to make a mark where that ends, or where the end of the rectangle ends. And then I'm going to start it at the beginning and count. So I'm using my other finger just to keep track of the placement. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So just like over here, we have our 6 measurements going down. So I'm gonna then move down here, and instead of keeping that same smaller amount, because that would fit way more than 6 times here, I'm gonna re-measure the rectangle that I have on my drawing, because my reference picture is a lot smaller than my drawing. So super important to remember this step of going back and finding that same unit of measure in your drawing and comparing it to the reference picture. So now I'm going to do the same thing and mark where that fits with my pencil and double check that this should fit 6 times within this height. If it doesn't fit 6 times, that's when you need to double check or change your proportions. So I have this here, and then I'm going to start at the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is a little long over here. So I need to shorten this since that fits 7 times. So I can maybe take a little bit off of the top here, and then a little bit off of the bottom. And then I'll just readjust and move this circle up. So now that I have the left side adjusted, I can double check the right side as well. So we said that this fits 7 times on this side versus the 6 times on the left side. So now I need to re-measure this smaller rectangle and compare it to the height on the right. So I'm going to re-grab that measurement with my thumb here, and then I'm going to count how many times this fits in my right side of the binoculars. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that fits again too many times. So I do need to shorten this. So I'll shorten the top here a little bit, and then I'll shorten the bottom, and I'm going to move this rectangle up. You can also double check the width. So I can take in my reference picture the height of that smaller box again and measure how many times it fits across the bottom. So it fits 1, 2 times across the bottom here. So now I'm going to come down to my reference picture, check that measurement, the height, and it fits a little bit more than 2 times in the bottom. So I do need to thin this out just a little bit. And then I can check the width on the right. Since this is closer to me, this should be a little bit wider. So I'm going to take the height again of that box and measure 1, 2, about 2.5 times it fits in the bottom here. So I'm going to come back to my drawing and double check. So 1, 2, and that is again a little wide. So I'm going to bring this in slightly so it is not as wide. The last thing I want to mention before we start bringing in detail to this drawing is talking about double checking angles. So looking at the binoculars, there's a few places where there are some angles that I can double check that those are correct. So the angle that this comes out here, I'm going to hold my pencil to the outside of that angle, and keeping my pencil at that same angle, I'm going to bring it down to compare it to what I have in my drawing. So in my drawing, that's a pretty accurate angle that I have there compared to my reference picture, but I can double check the other side. That looks good. This side here, and again, I'm just bringing this down. This needs to come out just a little bit. And you can even check angles of smaller areas. So this smaller square on the outside, for example, is in at an angle. I'm going to bring that over, and I actually need to adjust this so this comes out a little bit slanted before it goes in. Now that I'm confident with all of my proportions and angles, I'm starting to go in with detail. So I'm looking at the contour or the shape and line variation on the outside of the binoculars, and then also some of the detail and fine lines on the inside of the binoculars as well. A lot of times people start out with detail first before double checking proportions and then end up having to erase and start over. So this does save a lot of time in the long run if you're double checking proportions first before you're going in with a lot of detail and shading and then realizing something's off and having to erase and restart. So take your time and add as much detail as you can.